John Weddleton, Community and Economic Development Committee meeting December 3rd, 2020. Mandy, please do the roll call.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
He will miss the meeting. He's been excused.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here.
Ms. Zalatel?
Here.
And for other members, Mr. Rivera? Mr. Perez-Verdia?
Here.
Ms. Allard? Ms. LaFrance? Chairs, you have a quorum.
All right. Thank you. So what do we have here? The agenda. Proposed changes to the Title 1080 marijuana. We have a number of documents here. And I wanted to start out today with the one that just lists the various things that we've talked about. And I just went through and, sorry, I'm gonna try to get back to those now. So everybody should have got this in their email. Oops, sorry. And it is called, where's your, I'm sorry.
If I may, it's got a V2 at the end. That's the one you mean.
Yeah, it's just titled List of Possible Changes. Is that something, Mandy? Can you put that on the screen?
Oh, sorry, ignore me.
So this, I just went through notes for the last many months that we've been working on this, and just in somewhat haphazard way, cut and pasted various issues. So we've got 30 listed here, and there may be more. You know, Mandy hit a lot of things that the state has been doing that I don't think I captured all of those, but many of those are pretty clear cut that we'll just add them in or change the wording somewhat. So I wanted to go through this with everyone and just see if we have a consensus on these to help give Dean and Mandy some direction on piecing this together. So I think we touched on some of these things, but we never really gave a nod. And if some of these things aren't ready, that's fine too. Then we'll know where we stand on these. So the first one is the section on reporting and verification. Marijuana testing shall report the result of each required laboratory test directly into its marijuana inventory. And it was a fairly long section here, but this is one where I believe, Mandy, we were not getting the results anyway, and the state handles these reports. Is that correct?
That's correct. There was one part of that section, so it's not the whole section, but there was just one part that required that licensees submit reports of their testing to the municipal clerk. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we actually haven't been receiving. They do that report to the state. And so for licensing purposes, this is something that I don't think is necessary for them to send to us as well. We kind of don't have the same capacity for reviewing it that the state does with their health department.
Okay, thanks. So any thoughts on this from the committee? I'm watching chat, but you guys can chime in.
John, I'm just going to chime in. This is Crystal, if that's okay.
Sure.
So,
yeah, please.
I guess my question in this is, we would, if there was something being tested, and we had a little bit of an issue like this, I guess, a little over a year ago, but if there's some testing that turns out that there are some problems with one of the facilities or a particular batch that they've tested or something like that, would we not be notified of that? Would the state's responsibility would there be a responsibility for the state to notify us if that's the case? So I guess my question is, does this have any impact on whether or not we're given any information regarding some negative test results from a lab, from some of our establishments here in the municipality?
Through the chair, this is Mandy. I can answer that.
Yeah, please do.
So they will send us their notices of violation reports. We get sent those notices after they've been issued to the applicant. So they would do their inspections or their investigations, and if they find that any of these testing results are off or they haven't been doing what they should be, we get a copy of that notice of violation, and those the assembly does see attached to any renewals or transfer applications or any of the applications that come before you. So you do get those.
Okay, thank you. But we don't necessarily get anything directly then. We just get it through the state first. So thanks.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So thoughts on this? Should we go ahead and delete this? And I just wanted to go through these. Do we want to vote on each of these things, or just hearing no objection? I'll just make a recommendation. I recommend, or someone can make a motion to kind of delete the requirement for us to receive the reports.
You've got a couple people in the queue though, John.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Pete, I'm sorry. Thanks.
I have a question.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering how many testing facilities do we have in Anchorage? Or do we have 2? We were down to 1 for a while. Are we back up to 2?
We are still currently at 1 testing facility.
Wow, boy, they must be really, really busy. Yeah, I don't know whether we really need to keep this or not, Mr. Chairman. I wouldn't be against deleting it. Thank you.
Okay. Dean?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering, and this is probably from Andy, so if we get some red flags for some reason and the municipality, maybe our health department, or you wanted to get copies of these reports from the state, do we have that information sharing from the state where we were able to ask and receive the reports if we wanted them? I mean, I'd feel more comfortable getting rid of it if we still had access like that.
I don't know the answer to that for sure. I would assume the health department kind of has a similar relationship with the state that the clerk's office does, where if we request information, they send it to us, but they don't typically send us things that they aren't required to by statute on their own. So I think if there was a red flag with a notice of violation, the health department could request to see the full reports submitted by the licensees or the investigation, as long as it wasn't confidential. But I don't think they would actually send it of their own volition. So I don't know if the health department asks for that already, if there's issues, or if that would be something that could be something maybe added to code if we didn't want to remove this, that the health department maybe would be added in, but that would be something to check with them about too.
If I may.
Here, go ahead,
I think
Dean.
that you answered sufficiently, and it's not that I think we need to receive them voluntarily, but just if we request. So, and I think you've answered that. Yeah, we have a good relationship, and if we request something, they'll send it to us. Maybe redact anything confidential that's there, similar to a public records request, but government to government, not having to do a formal records request. They'll just send it if it's subject to disclosure. So I think that I'm fine reading this, given that situation. And I don't think we need to codify anything, given the ability to ask for something like that. It's in place under public records law anyway, I think. So thanks, Mandy.
All right, thanks, Dean. Meg, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So one possibility, if we don't want to completely delete this, and I don't mean to throw another, well, I do mean to throw another option into the mix, but we could do, and Dean would probably weigh in on this, but that we can certainly refer to the state of Alaska doing this work, but leave the option. So leave it that the municipality could just rely on the state or do this. It's a thought. I don't necessarily know what those folks who are doing this work, if they feel like the state is sufficient or not. I guess that's a piece of missing information we have.
So what
Mr.
would you
Chair,
expect?
since you said I might speak to it, I think I will.
Okay, Dean, go ahead.
So hearing you talk about that gives me some thought, and yeah, I think I can get some language that just says the lab still has to file the report with the state, under our code. Now we know it's not to us, and if they fail to do it, it still becomes then a violation if they're not doing the required reporting to the state. So I think that we can put something in here, and that just says, do this with the state as you're required to, and if the state doesn't take action, we can under this provision. So without actually getting all the reports all the time ourselves. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I will put in some language to that effect.
Okay, thanks, Dean. Crystal, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I'm just kind of tracking with this, and I agree. Along the lines of like what Meg was saying, I think we might want to keep our options open here in the municipality. And I'm thinking specifically, if we do know that a lab has tested something in one of our establishments here that might be harmful, we would want to know right away. We wouldn't have to wait for that to go through the state's processes, because I don't really know how long it might take for the state to actually even read one of those reports. So anyway, I guess I'm just thinking that we probably want to cover that base a little bit better, and maybe even make sure that maybe there's some other things that we want to ask these testing facilities to be more responsive on, in case there is more of a significant health issue at stake. So I appreciate Dean volunteering to start to do some kind of language in that respect. And I agree, we don't need every report on all the testing, but we certainly want to make sure we get quick notification on potential violations. So thanks.
Well, I think on this, the marijuana, it says facilities shall report. So we would be asking the lab to tell us when they got an NOV. Crystal, is that the intent?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, particularly if it's a significant enough health risk, that makes sense to me. I mean, that's why they do testing. So it just seems like we would want to know quickly if something like this is circulated or might be circulated in our community. And I just don't know how quickly the state would be responsive to tell us that, oh, hey, your lab tested something in one of your shops that's not a good thing. So anyway, I'd rather be on the safe side of that. Thanks.
Okay. But I think a key there. So Mandy, do we automatically get a copy of the NOV from the state?
We do. So we already get a copy of NOVs, but this is a little bit different. So this requirement is for the testing facility to send a report of all of the tests that they've done for individual facilities. So this is not specific to issues that is found. It's just like reporting. So it would be kind of like a quarterly report that's just an informational, so that it's something that the state health department looks at for red flags, and then the state would look into it and potentially issue a notice of violation, which would come to the municipality. So this requirement is specifically for the testing facility to send that report of all of their testing results to the municipality, like they currently do to the state. And then we would have to go through that report and review it for any irregularities or any red flags.
And Mandy, would that go to you or to the health department?
Code currently says the clerk, so it would come to the clerk's office. And I think this was a portion that was copied from the state regulations initially. And so I know what they do
Mr.
is
Chair, can I follow
they
up?
probably forward it to their state health department, which is something that we would do if this was something that we were required to do and we're getting those reports.
Okay. Dean, go ahead.
Thanks. So I wanted to just recall that we do have investigative powers to get business records and so forth whenever we wanted to, which would include these reports that the labs have to retain. But I don't remember, Mandy, do you, how long are the marijuana labs, what is their records retention requirement under the law, the state or our code? Is it 2 years, 3 years? So we do have some time rather than they have to have them, and we can ask for them under investigative powers from the lab, or just as a matter of comity from the state. How long do they have to retain the records?
I don't know that off the top of my head. I think you're right that it's 2 years.
Okay. And this list could be fairly long. You could have 1,000 lines or something. Do you think every month? I mean, I don't know how much they're testing, but every batch from every grow operation.
I think so. I have never seen one, but if they're recording every testing that they do, testing is required through every step of the processing of the product. So they would probably be pretty large reports.
Okay. So what's the sense here? Okay, is it okay, Chris? Are you back in, or is that your previous one?
I'm back in.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Because some of this spurs some more questions just in terms of the process, and I guess what I'm fuzzy on, and somebody can clarify this, is just their internal controls that these labs have, and at what point does the test result trigger some kind of actual action, and does it just go into a report and then somebody looks at it and says, okay, well, this is a potential violation here, or we need to check into it. I guess I'm looking at, so who's interpreting the data? Who makes that initial call on whether or not a product needs to be, not approved, or there needs to be further investigation into what's going on in a grow operation for some kind of potential spread of some kind of bacteria or whatever. But anyway, I guess I'm trying to really get a handle on what that process looks like, what the real impact is of of testing, and who makes that call. And at what point. So I guess I'm just looking for I want there to be somebody there that can basically, pick up the phone, dial 911, I'm being, sarcastic, but, just the idea that we make sure that these testing facilities are getting information out quickly when there is some kind of a real problem. So what kind of assurance do we have in those processes that says that when something gets tested and it's a bad product and they need to get it off the market, and they maybe need to check out to see if there's anything else like it that's been contaminated as well, how quick does that process actually take place? Does anybody know? Thanks.
Okay, those are good questions. So I guess the result on this one can be that we get that information for the next meeting.
Well, and I would appreciate that, because like I said, if there's more that we need to do to finesse this rather than to just get rid of it, I think we probably need to have that conversation, because again, I'm not really sure how these reports are being used and monitored and interpreted in case there really is a problem We want to be able to be as responsive as quickly as possible, not having to wait until everything goes through some kind of record keeping, and maybe somebody will look at it, maybe they won't. Anyway, so I think we do maybe need some more information. Thanks.
Okay, so I think, Mandy, can you just make a note then, is get a copy of a report so we can see? You know, is it 6 lines or is it 1,000? That would be a difference. And then also, I think somewhere we've seen what triggers a bad test, like a certain amount of bacteria or mold or something, but get that information and then find out from AMCO, how quickly are they getting on this? Do they get that report and a month later glance through it, or is this something they're motivated to do quickly?
Mr. Chair, may I?
Sure, Dean, go ahead.
And I don't have the answers. Need to look at this some more, but I think part of this might relate to well, the whole function of a lab and why they have to be independently owned from retailers and cultivators and all that. So I think the lab's testing of each batch is a prerequisite for the batch going to market at retail. And I'm looking at section 108340. It requires the testing, right, for each batch, and testing has to be completed, and then the testing lab, you know, approve the labeling for the product before it can be sold at retail. So if it doesn't pass the lab's tests, I think that's the screening here that made part of your concern. The lab itself will say, no, this batch that you've sent us isn't in compliance, or the claimed amounts of THC are not falling within the labeling amount, blah, 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 something like that. So I also think that if some labs inadequate, we've seen situations in the past, right, where the testing wasn't accurate enough and the state had taken some action. I think one lab had to close. So there are some things in place, I think. But I haven't thought about those in a while, and like I said, just need a little time. But I think there are some provisions that enable, I guess, if we needed to look at a lab's reports, but also the lab's function to screen out and protect the public from bad batches. So I hope that's helpful.
So the lab is the first line of defense, essentially.
John?
Yeah, go ahead.
And if that's the case, if all of this is already written, you know, all these procedures are already written into code that apply specifically to labs, then, you know, I'm happy to let this go. And that's, you know, that's just kind of what I'm saying is, you know, do we have the assurance that we get notified of things that could potentially be a problem that we really do need to look into? Or do we just end up waiting weeks or months until the state decides that, oh, there might be something here to look at? So anyway, so I just want to make sure that those safeguards are in there somewhere. And if it's not in this one, it's in something else, I'm fine with that. Thanks.
So would you like to remove this requirement that the testing facilities send us reports? That's to Crystal. Are you comfortable, or?
No, I understand. I guess I'm not sure I have the answer to the question. And like I said, if the safeguards are built in, and that's the question, maybe Dean's answer is enough, you know, just in terms of that the labs know that they're going to not approve something, then I guess it's, you know, the public's protected in that sense, and we don't maybe need to be notified additionally to that.
Okay.
So anyway, I guess I'm 50-50 on this, and maybe back to just the idea of Meg's suggestion of making it an option. Thanks.
Okay, Meg, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable removing this. I'm comfortable on allowing an initial reliance on the state process, but giving us and making sure that we have a backup. I can think of a lot of scenarios. One, when we figure out the practicalities, you know, how are these reports reviewed, how often, or if there are budget cuts or other things where we can then rest back or make sure we have control to do this work if this is what we need to be doing in a timely manner. So I think we can kind of compromise and defer to a state process if the state process is good, and not have to do that work. But if we find that it's not good, or there's an problem, or we're seeing a lot of notice of violations and it doesn't seem like anything's happening, then we still have this capacity to do this work. Thanks.
Okay. So like we can wait on this one then, I think. If we Mandy can check with, is it Jane Sawyer? Is that at Damco? And we get a sense and find out how they're handling these reports and how quickly. Does that work, Mandy?
Yes, I will contact Jane and get some answers and report back.
Okay, thanks. So number 2 on here is just dealing with the state of Alaska change. And this is, I guess what we have here is new wording that's in the state of Alaska, but we need to change it a bit, like where it says the board. Is that correct, Mandy?
Yes, I thought I went through the other draft and fixed all of the areas where it said the board. So the draft that Dean has to go over, it might already be fixed.
Oh, okay. That's possible. I was not, I in my notes had not gone through everything from the state of Alaska recommendations. So this is there, so, and otherwise the change here is pretty simple. Right, I don't, nothing here, so okay. Okay, so any thoughts from the committee on this? Okay, so I think with that one, we should just do it, the match the state. Okay, 3 is another state of Alaska change, and this was AMCO approving marijuana trade shows, age restricted. And I think we had a consensus to add a new section to match it and add a definition of trade show. Is that correct?
Through the chair, we added the new section of the trade show information into the draft AO. The state does not have a definition of trade show, so we could do that. I think it'll have to be thought out really carefully because there's a lot of different gathering types that could potentially be excluded if we define it and limit it.
How will the state do it if they don't have a clear definition?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, Mandy referred to it, and it's on page 38, 39 of the AO, a new section 108770. Yeah, I guess it might be wise to look at making a definition.
So who can make a definition? Dean?
I guess we can bring one back to the next meeting.
Okay.
Me and Mandy, and we can make one for our jurisdiction.
Okay, so Dean will bring a definition. Okay. Let's look at.
John, really quick on that. This is Meg.
Yeah, Meg, go ahead.
I would recommend reaching out to probably Ms. Welzine or someone who's probably familiar with the idea of what a trade show is in other jurisdictions as well, just to rely on that expertise and what maybe the industry views as a trade show so that we make sure we're considering that.
Yeah, definitely. Earlier rather than later. So I don't know if she's here. Is Ms. Weltzine here?
Through the chair, Mr. Weddleton, I am here. Did I properly unmute myself?
You did. I think you were just assigned a task.
Okay, yes, I can work with Dean on that.
Okay, good. Okay. Jenna, do you have a copy of what we're going through?
Yes, well, I have it on the screen and my computer was reloading itself, and so I've got it printed out now. It took me a second to get back on here,
Okay.
but I've got it. Yep.
Okay, good. Thanks. Okay, so on the trade shows, we'll get a definition, and we've already got that new section in the draft. Okay, number 4, we had a consensus on this, I believe, and that limits on quantity sold to a customer. And there was some wording change there. And 5 was some new wording on corporate officer or director being residents of the state. And I believe we said we would go with that. I'm not sure if these yeses, those weren't my notes. 6 is regarding requirement that a new person identified or that be a resident of the state. I don't require exactly what that one was. Do you remember, Mandy?
Mandy, through the chair, this is Jana. Unless Mandy knows the answer, it's the adding directors onto a corporation. They also have to be residents of the state.
Okay, I'm not sure why it says no after it. I'm not sure that these yeses and nos on here were what we decided or not when I went through my notes.
I don't know where those came from either. This number 6, it was just a section that applied to the corporate officer portion. This is not something we have to worry about. It was just a section that the state repealed and then readopted as written so that the changes in 015 carried through to this section as well.
Okay. Okay, Dean?
I think that I just sort of vaguely remember the conversation. I think that your no was a response to, I think some from the industry were saying, well, if in the future federal law changes, then that restriction to residents of the state would be a violation of the Dormant Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which would be true, but not at this point, I think. So I think that it's actually easier to either do nothing or just track the state at this point. But I think that's why you put the no. So because of that concern about possible future changes in the law. But I think it's hard to hang your hat on possible future changes from Congress.
Okay, good. So basically with this change, if we do nothing, then we still say anybody who's got ownership or control has to be a resident. Is that correct?
Yeah. Status quo.
Okay. So then on 3, 4, 5, and 6, basically make sure we match up with the state is where we've landed. Any comments from the committee? Okay, so now we get into, this might be a longer discussion to spin off for later, but the separation distances is kind of a big deal. And this is just grabbing notes that I wrote down. So, and I think we've got as part of our package for today, a list of a comparison of protected land uses. So I'd rather skip this for now and then go and do the, kind of go through this longer list without hitting those yet. Does that work for everyone? Silence means yes. Let's skip 7 through 12 and go to 13. And 13 is wording for marijuana shops and strip malls. I believe the last 3 that we've done in strip malls had essentially this wording in there, but done through amendment. Any comments on this?
You're correct,
John,
John. This is
yeah.
Pete. Yeah, you're correct. That's what we did.
Okay.
Yep, this
Keep
is Meg.
comfortable.
I was going to say that sounds good to me. Keep it consistent with what we've been doing.
Dean,
Mr. Chair.
go ahead. Dean?
Yeah, I think that change would be under Title 21. We should check with Mr. Yao. So maybe not part of this 1080 chapter.
Okay. Ryan, are you here?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dean's correct. That would be an appropriate addition to Title 21 rather than Title 10. The exact section in Title 21 that should be placed in, I'd have to do some looking to see where it's most appropriate, but yes, that could be incorporated into Title 21.
Okay. Well, let's go through. We might hit other Title 21 stuff here. Well, if we do separation distances, right? That's Title 21. So that could be rolled into that. I mean, in the meantime, there's not been a problem to add it through amendment, but it's nice to have it in there so business owners know what's coming. Okay. Crystal, are you back in?
Back in, yes, thank you. Yeah, I think we've been pretty consistent on this particular item. And I guess my only question would and this would have to come from, some of these property owners, commercial property owners, but would there be a time when somebody a property owner would refuse to allow that to happen in their facility? And of course, that then becomes a challenge for the company that's trying to rent the space. But anyway, that would be the only thing I think might be a drawback here, is that commercial building owners would say, well, no, for whatever reason, I can't allow that to happen. So it would limit a lot more places where potential businesses could go in. But anyway, that would be a concern for some of these people trying to find a location. But otherwise, again, yeah, this is something that makes sense, and I'll support it. It just could have its own fair share of challenges. So thanks.
It could, but the way we've been doing it, adding it at the very last minute as an amendment, then they're really stuck if the building owner says, no, you can't do that. So having it in the code so they know before, presumably they've read the code before they go rent a place, they would check with the owner. So what we've been doing is in some ways a little bit unfair. Though I've been the one doing it, so maybe I'm the unfair guy, but I thought it was important. Okay, so we will add that to the list of Title 21 changes. 14 is just a rewording of the restriction on not being in a liquor store. And I believe we had a consensus to match basically what the state of Alaska said, licensed premises should not overlap. And I believe, Ryan, you had said that's basically what you're doing.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair.
Or so this would be Title 21 as well, right?
Correct.
Okay. Would you recommend a change in wording then so it's more clear?
I don't think it's going to hurt anything. If anything, it'll clarify. So, in practice, this is what we're doing already, but it will certainly clarify the regulations to add that amendment.
Okay, so as we hit these, we're leaving these up to you to do the details, Ryan. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Yeah, okay. And make sure you're equipped to do that. Okay. So any comments on that, Forrest?
Yeah, and I apologize. I just got distracted right at the worst moment, so I missed what Ryan just said, but I want to make sure that this isn't. So, the goal of the initiative was to regulate marijuana like alcohol, and the shared ingress. I'm wondering how how broadly that's defined. So, for example, there was an Oak and Keg liquor store in the Northway Mall that I believe had an interior entrance. And I know there are other shared commercial spaces where you have liquor stores with a shared interior door. And I'm wondering, does that mean then that there can be no marijuana shop anywhere in that entire mall? Because technically, you walk into the Northway Mall, you could walk, many hundreds of yards in one, or hundreds of yards in one direction, or hundreds of yards in the other, and they're not really shared. But if you define ingress broadly, they would be. So, Ryan, can you speak to that?
Sure. So through the chair, that specific scenario would be allowed. So, a real simple example of that too would be if you've got a vestibule area and you've got one entrance that goes into a liquor store and one entrance that goes into a marijuana retail store. As long as you have controlled entry points into either of those two facilities, you can have some type of, shared passageway or entryway that gets you inside of an enclosed space. We just need to make sure that we have controlled access points that separate common passage between a liquor store or, a bar into a marijuana retail establishment.
Got it. Okay. All right. That's a much more, I think, restrictive and appropriate definition of ingress than I was conceiving of. So thank you. With that, I'm satisfied.
Okay, good. All right, so 15, add marijuana in a non-permanent structure. This, I think when it came up, we were thinking the greenhouses was the main thought, and it might have discussion might have expanded a little bit beyond there. I see a note about a coffee stand. But I don't know where we landed on this, if we had much discussion. So any thoughts from the committee?
I'd like to hear.
I have a thought.
Go ahead.
Dean, go ahead.
Well, I think we might be restricted by state law on where marijuana facilities are allowed in structures. We got the freestanding building requirement, so I don't think they're allowed in temporary buildings at this time. But I haven't tracked that closely. But I think that we need state law change before we can make this kind of change.
My recollection is that this parallels a state law change. Is that correct, Mandy?
I thought so too. There was a change that I added in to the draft AO that was about the temporary structures, and my recollection was that it would have had to do with Title 21 stuff, and I thought Ryan said there was something about the greenhouses with the Title 21 requirements.
Yeah, so through the chair, this is Ryan. I can comment on that. So Title 21 requires that all marijuana establishments have a valid certificate of zoning compliance. So that kind of leads you down a different path where all buildings have to meet residential and well, not residential, it'd be commercial code in this case, which means, foundation hooked up to utilities, and has applicable or appropriate facilities for employees and for customers. Things like connexes and hoop houses and coffee kiosks, they don't meet that definition. They don't have valid certificate of zoning compliance. We have had examples where folks have pursued a more temporary looking structure that's, say a metal framed fabric structure. And there are cases where you can do that and get a valid certificate of zoning compliance and then have a marijuana establishment in there. But I can't recall the exact reason why that wasn't pursued by this particular business. It may have had to do with cost, to where it basically was the same cost as just going into a building or building a solid structure. But there are specific cases where that is allowed. It just has to have that valid certificate of zoning compliance.
But we have legal greenhouses in town.
Correct.
So do they not have some kind of certificate of compliance?
Through the chair, I don't know for certain, but it'd be very safe to assume that yes, they do have some type of certificate of compliance. Okay.
So potentially, if this were, we had something in there that narrowed down that said greenhouses, kind of focusing on greenhouses, and not so much, what's that sandwich shop that has a liquor license down now? We've gone around and around with Alchemist, but more focused on the cultivation side. Because I'm talking to Ryan. Is that something you've considered?
So we have considered the greenhouses. We just haven't had a ton of interest expressed to us from the industry, to be honest. I mean, the majority of folks are moving into fully enclosed buildings. Mm-hmm. I think there's a number of reasons for that. I'm certainly not a marijuana cultivation expert, but I think a lot of it has to do with controlling your HVAC system is much easier when you're in an enclosed building, as well as controlling light cycles, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dean, go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Well, I did note that Ms. Wilson had a comment in the chat, and I think that this whole issue relates more to compliance with building codes, and that someone from Development Services and Bob Dole's team would be qualified to speak to that. But I think it's more about, well, what is the structure used for? And if it's used for a greenhouse, then you've got building code requirements for greenhouses, and if they pass it, they get the certificate. So just sort of generally speaking. So I think that we're thinking too rigidly of being in the building, but there's different types of buildings, different building codes that apply to them.
Right. So any thoughts from the committee on this? Should we look for wording to allow greenhouses? Drop it?
John, I was in the queue, I think. This is Meg.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I missed you. Go ahead, Meg.
Oh, no worries. I'd like to try to include it. I would rather be more expansive than restrictive here, and see what we can come up with. If we're doing this, let's try to think maybe toward the future a little bit, and see what we can come up with. If it just seems completely unworkable, then we'll learn that. But it seems like that's not necessarily the case. Thanks.
Okay, Forrest?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Meg, and as Jana put in the chat, there are state law is more flexible, does allow a variety of things, and I also feel, as the district that was the former home of the Manlizer greenhouse, that we have a duty to stand up for the rights of greenhouses.
Okay, so again, this looks like a Title 21, Ryan?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
So would you be able to write a little section then adding in where greenhouses would be, and I guess matching state code then if the state's made a change, so connexes and greenhouses would work, and sketch something together.
Correct. Yeah, I can put that together.
So when you do that, would you be working with Bob Dole and make sure that matches their requirements? Is that standard?
Yes. Yeah, I'd make sure that we're not creating any conflicts with building codes there.
Okay. Okay, so that's 15. 16, allow drive-throughs. And I believe this was State of Alaska appears to be heading that way. I don't know that we know that, but Do you have any update on that?
Yes, this is Mandy. So the state did extend the emergency order to allow the drive-throughs, and they added the option to make permanent. So that's out for public comment right now. The making it a permanent addition is out for public comment, so that may come later. So right now there's still a sunset for the drive-throughs.
Excuse me. Okay. Thoughts from the committee? Oh, I see Jana. So Jana, in the chat says state of Alaska is not actually heading that way. It's just an extension of the emergency. It looks permanent because to the extent the emergency exists. Is that your sense,
Right.
Mandy? Jan,
Yeah, I kind of agree. They have it out for public comment to make it permanent was the last thing I heard. But that's out for public comment. So that's not how it sits right now.
Okay.
And through the chair, if I could clarify, the language of the permanent
See.
regulations states while the emergency has been declared either by the governor or the legislature. So if it's no emergency, then it wouldn't be applicable even if it was adopted.
Okay. Okay, so my sense on that, we should wait. It would be premature for us to make a change. Any comments from the committee?
John, this is Crystal.
Crystal, go ahead.
Thanks. First of all, I'm not sure we have any true drive-through type situations. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I can't think of any place where you can literally drive up like you're ordering a milkshake from McDonald's, and order up marijuana. But we certainly have the ability to walk up to windows or doors or something like that. So it seems to me that's what we really ought to be focusing on is, and that probably will be a trend, this idea of curbside delivery, so to speak, or where somebody can walk out of a shop and hand it over to the driver that's sitting in the parking space at the front door. So, things like that, I think we probably do need to look at and make sure that we have a way to permit that makes sense. But the actual drive-through thing, I would be happy to wait on. I'm not sure there's a real demand for that just yet. And, and obviously Ryan Yell has a comment in there that there's a lot of design requirements that would go along with that, because now you're talking about space in a parking lot and a lot of other details to look into. But anyway, whatever we can do to kind of maybe solidify that the idea of walking up to a window or having better curbside service, we probably ought to look into that. Thanks.
Okay, Jana has posted, I guess, a Q&A. What is that, Jana, that you posted?
That's from the AMPCO site, kind of just explaining like this is permanent, but it's got this in the language. It's got this sunset that naturally will expire when the emergency is over.
Okay, thanks. Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let the committee know that we currently have 4 marijuana retail sales establishments that have applied for curbside pickup. So they are authorized to do so as long as there's the municipal emergency order allowing it, or having no objection to allowing that. As far as drive-throughs go, there is only one facility that moved into a former restaurant that had a drive-through, so they were able to retain that in their site plan, but they're not choosing to utilize it for several reasons. But you could have some type of drive-through already in code, but it would be very restrictive, and the only way that it would work is, say a retail establishment moved into like a former Jiffy Lube. The way that it would have to work is a car would pull in to the garage space, The door would have to close behind them. The driver would have to exit the vehicle, purchase their product, get back in their vehicle. The garage door would open on the opposite end and they would drive out. So it doesn't really make sense under current code for that type of situation, rather than just having a normal retail space. But I also I don't get very many questions about drive-throughs. I can recall maybe 2 instances in the 3 or so years that we've been doing this that there's been any interest in a drive-through.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really know if it's something that's necessary.
Okay, thank you. Pete
Mr.
added
Chair?
in the chat
sorry.
that it's a new normal. Crystal, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to see if we could ask Ryan to expand a little bit on the process. He mentioned that there are 4 shops that have applied for curbside pickup. So can you tell us a little bit more about what an application looks like and what's being required of facilities before they actually get any kind of approval or permitting? Thanks.
Sure, I can do it. So through the chair, it's a very simple process that we have. And essentially, the folks just need to write us a detailed narrative in a request, and then provide us with a description of where they're going to have curbside pickup or a pickup window. And then the emergency order doesn't authorize curbside pickup. It just says we will not enforce the regulations prohibiting curbside pickup. So essentially what our authorization, if I'll call it that, or approval, is really a letter of non-objection to their use of curbside pickup. But we also make it very clear that once that emergency order expires or is rescinded, then they could be enforced upon if they continue to use curbside pickup.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so thoughts on this then? I guess I listed drive-through, but we could call it curbside pickup as well. Should we pursue something there or just let this go and leave it as an emergency issue? I'm sensing that we just leave this alone until state does something.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with that too. And I do think, although they perhaps are legally the same or very similar, I do think that curbside pickup and their drive-through thing are a little bit distinct. And you could think of scenarios where you might want to allow curbside pickup but not drive-through. But I think that where people on foot could get it. But I agree. I think we should wait for further state action before we take action.
Okay. 17. This is almost a big one, but it's more, I know, for everybody, Crystal's brought this up, change the threshold for assembly review of change. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is separate from that. This, I think Ryan had brought up. Modifications of facility of 20% or above is too hard and too time consuming, takes 90 days, community council meeting. Should we delegate it all to the planning director with a periodic report? What, and I think, did I encapsulate your key points, Ryan?
So through the chair, I'm not exactly sure what the origin of this one was, but we made amendments to the modification requirements in our last AO, which I think was a year and some odd time ago. But we had changed it so that all facilities, if they're increasing their licensed premises area by 20% or more, it requires assembly approval. Also, any second subsequent increase requires assembly approval. My thoughts on this is I would like to keep it as is, only because if you just have it all delegated to the planning director with a periodic report, we could have a facility that had a 100%, 200% expansion, which could be seen as quite an impact to the surrounding properties, and the assembly would not have any oversight over that. So really that's a question for the assembly, whether or not they want that oversight, and whether they would like to increase that threshold of 20%.
Yes, that's a question here. Forrest, are you in the queue on this one?
Yeah, exactly. And that was the question I was going to ask Ryan. Do we have statistics on what percentage of these changes meet that 20% threshold? And then if so, is there a more logical breaking point? Like, is it more common for people to do 30% than 50%? You know, should the threshold be 40%? Like what do we have data on it? And what do you feel is a more appropriate threshold? Now, I guess I'd also like to hear from Jana about what kind of modifications are typically made as well, because I agree. Like what we're trying to do is not have relatively minor changes come constantly to the assembly, and 20% seems a little low to me. So I'm wondering what the new threshold might practically be.
Yeah. So through the chair, this is Ryan. So in all of 2020, we had one, what we call a major modification to a marijuana special land use permit that went before the assembly. So we had one that met the 20% threshold, and we had 8 that were below the 20% threshold. And the vast majority of the modifications that we get are quite minor. I mean, they're alterations of a floor plan, so it's all within the licensed premises area, or maybe they're adding on another room, or they're repurposing another room. So they're shifting licensed premises area between, you know, say a cultivation and a manufacturing, or a cultivation and a retail. Mm-hmm. There's a very few that actually go above that 20% threshold.
Okay. Well, I mean, that speaks towards the efficacy of the appropriateness of the current threshold then. Mr. Chairman, can we hear from Jana too, if she has any thoughts on this?
Ms. Waltzing?
Sure. Thank you. Through the chair. You know, a lot of times people strategize to stay underneath that 20%. And so sometimes that's why you see that, you know, increase in minor. I mean, I can tell you right now, there's a facility I'm working with in Mr. Constant's area that we are really being strategic about keeping it under 20%, because we don't want to have to go through the process of having a whole major modification, because it really is the same time frame as a whole new special land use permit when it comes to the actual review and approval time period. So, I mean, that's part of the reason why you see minors over majors. The major, I think that Ryan was referring to was raspberry roots, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that was the modification of the manufacturing, and that was, you know, time consuming. So I would just say, you know, I would like to see it change, because I do know that we strategize to keep it under that 20% to try to, you know, avoid the time it takes. It's just the time. It's not even going in front of the assembly, it's just the sheer time of getting it in front of the assembly. But that's really all I had to add on that.
Okay, well, that's an important point. So any more thoughts, Dean? Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just had a question for Ryan. I think that the 20% threshold here, it's sort of modeled after some other Title 21 provisions for other types of uses, where the threshold between minor and major modification and the level of review is also 20%. So it's rather consistent through Title 21. Is that right, Ryan?
So through the chair, it's actually more lenient for marijuana. For a conditional use or a site plan review, it would be 10%. And that 10% change is also, I have to look at the exact wording, but that's exactly how it is. But it is, you know, it's like 10% within the development area. So it applies to the whole site versus a 20% expansion of just the licensed premises area. So we are more lenient with marijuana.
Okay, thank you. Forrest?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, just to that, Ryan, though, I mean, there are many other industries, right, including retail industries, that don't have the same kind of regulatory framework, and we don't see them at the assembly. I assume they maybe go to the planning director or otherwise internally handled. But for example, let's say you had a restaurant without an alcohol, license. You had a restaurant that wanted to expand by 50%. Would that come to the assembly? I mean, especially if it was like, let's say it was within an existing structure, but they wanted to say take over in a mall, they want to take over the unit next to them and expand by 50%. Would that come to the assembly for approval?
So through the chair, there's some caveats to that, but to answer your question, no, it wouldn't go to the assembly. It would go to Planning and Zoning Commission or the planning director, depending upon however that restaurant was originally approved. If it was done under any type of major site plan review or part of a large retail commercial establishment, then it would have to go to Planning and Zoning Commission. If it was just a by right restaurant use in, say, a strip mall, and it didn't have any high level review or any high level review wasn't required, all they would need is just a building permit.
Right, and we don't approve building permits.
No.
Yeah. So with that in mind, and given Jana's testimony that there is some gamesmanship right now to try to stay under the 20% threshold, and in general, we don't try to intentionally sort of suppress how much expansion businesses do, right? I mean, it means in some cases more jobs or more commerce. Would you be open to a higher threshold? And if so, what would that threshold be?
It's a question to Ryan.
So through the chair, again, I'd probably just have to punt the ball back to the assembly on that one, largely just due to the fact that the establishment of marijuana uses within a community, we do really value community input on that. And I think it was early on in the process, 20% is just kind of a good number to rely on in terms of impacts, whether they're likely to be significant or less significant, having those alterations. So, I mean, sure, there could be some leeway, say 5% plus or minus, but to actually give you a solid number and say, well, I definitively say that 30% is appropriate or 40% is appropriate. I can't really say. I guess I would put that back on the assembly and get some community input on that.
Okay, thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Follow up?
No, I think I'm good on this. I mean, my sense is that we don't have a good idea yet of where to go on this one. So I think it's something we should continue talking about, but I'm sensitive to the time and I have an 11:30 meeting. So I suggest we press forward.
Well, what's the sense here then? We'll have something coming forward with changes in licensing and Title 21. Should we have this in there with a 30% to get public comment on the issue at all, or just drop it? Comments to the committee, from the committee. I'm not sure what silence means in this case. So, okay, well, I would say at this point, no change then, unless Crystal?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm kind of mulling this over too, so I don't know that I'm prepared to throw out a number. I think we obviously need to think about it a little bit because it sounds like nobody's ready to just throw out the idea altogether. But if it's something that streamlines the processes a little bit better, I think what Jan is saying is it's very time consuming. Well, if it's time consuming to them, it's time consuming probably to planning department as well. So anyway, I think we probably do want to think about this, and maybe the easy answer is to talk about that threshold number, and maybe we just need a little time to think about that. And certainly if anybody had any other details that would help make that decision, that would help. But anyway, I think we move forward with it in some way, shape, or form. Thanks.
So when we get a omnibus Title 21 change bill, put this in there with the 30% or something, just to get the discussion going, and then,
Correct.
okay,
John, that sounds good to me too. Pete, 30% would not be a problem, I don't believe. Thanks.
and that's something if we get public feedback, get it around the community councils and so on, and get that they may oppose it, and it's easy to pull that out through an amendment. So does that work, Ryan?
That works for me, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks. So 18, state change, so cultivation and retail can overlap in their restricted areas is coming soon. Has that come yet, Mandy?
Yes. So I have that added in the draft AO.
Okay. Any thoughts on that from the committee? And I think the issue there was break rooms could overlap, that kind of thing. Is that correct?
Correct. Break rooms, restrooms. So if a facility has the cultivation and retail on one site, they are allowed to use the same like office space and restroom and break room space for both facilities.
Okay. Okay, any thoughts on that? Okay, so, and that's already in there, so we've got that ready to go. Okay. 19, limit number of licenses comes up, and my notes are, we decided not yet. Is that correct? If that's not correct, chime in.
John, this
Okay.
is Crystal.
Crystal?
I think we recognize that it's a little bit of a mess to try to figure out how we would even start to do that. But one thing that occurred to me just, a little bit ago in some of the other conversation that we were having is one of the things that I think may limit the expansion of the number of licenses might be our testing capacity in the municipality. I think it was Pete that brought up the fact that we have one lab functioning right now. And like he said, they must be really busy. So I'm kind of wondering, at what point do we overstress that kind of required infrastructure? And maybe we need to have something that ties the number of facilities to the capacity of the testing facility. So anyway, I'll just throw that out there for something to think about. So thanks.
Yeah, that's a thought. I think we have one testing facility in Anchorage, but there's others in the state. Is that correct, Mandy?
Yeah, there's a few throughout the state.
Okay.
It might be interesting to find out if that's been a challenge for any of the grow operations or manufacturing operations. I don't know. I guess it'd be the grow operation that actually does that, uses the testing facilities. But anyway, it might be interesting to get some feedback from them as to what kind of delays or how long it takes to get something tested with the one facility we have right now, or with all the facilities that we have in the state. If there's the ability to access even some of the other ones. I mean, I doubt if somebody from Anchorage is going to take stuff up to Fairbanks, but maybe they do. So anyway, it's just something to think about. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Dean?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. On that last part, I just thought that the number of testing labs and so forth is more, I think, a matter of economic supply and demand in the market than a regulatory issue. But I asked to speak mostly because I think that this question, limiting the number of licenses, it's more deserving of a separate ordinance, and because it's so controversial and such a substantive impact on the industry overall, as well as controversial. So the ordinance and things we're talking about are more updates and maybe some to be consistent with the state regs and for our practices and the evolving industry. So improvements to the code, so to speak, rather than substantive changes that are for like this limited number of licenses. So I would just recommend keeping that as a separate ordinance than trying to incorporate something like that issue into the ordinances we're talking about now for updating.
Okay, good point. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're not yet on that. Number 20 is regarding increasing fees on NOVs. My understanding is we were in agreement on that and we just wanted to see what that would look like. Is that something, Dean, would you come up with new fee structure or do we go to code enforcement? Did you get that, Dean?
Sorry, I missed the first part about a new fee structure.
Well, looking at different fees, we
fines for NOVs.
Fines, yes, that would be correct. Thanks.
Oh, well, I think that originally that was set out as sort of a collaboration between legal and code enforcement, health, and clerk's office. So, yeah, I mean, we had just stuff needed. I think that's more of a collaborative perspective in changing the amounts. But definitely code enforcement should have a bit of weight to their perspective of what should change in terms of what's effective for enforcement and what sort of violations need heftier fines to get voluntary compliance and stuff like that.
Okay. Okay, and for what issues? And I think Rich Fern had mentioned.
Probably ask them to review the list and come back with recommendations for changes.
Okay, so I can. I'll contact them and see what they think. Get something rolling there. Okay. Procedure for closure of business, and we had a consensus that something should be in code, and we actually had a paragraph or so written up on that I'm not quite sure where that came from. But is that, so we should keep working on that, right? Dean, did you have wording for that?
This is Dean.
Go ahead, Dean.
So, yeah, that's on my task list. I'm sorry I haven't come up with the process, but I have some notes on it, and we'll work with Mandy for language for the next time. It's not on our draft yet.
Okay. Okay, then 22, can accessory use be a protected use? And that's almost in that, might belong in that separation distance issue, but that, I think, Ryan, is that where we landed on the religious services at Hope Center, that it was an accessory use and not protected?
So through the chair, that particular situation, it was another primary use, but it was defined as religious services, and religious services is not defined as a protected land use. So that situation was a little more unique and different than that question. But typically, you know, an accessory use, a primary use is the only one that we would consider as a protected land use, but there could be multiple primary uses on one site. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. But if there's an accessory use that's recognized that operates intermittently, you know, typically we would not consider that a protected use.
Okay. So is that something we could say? I guess that would belong up there in the separation distance discussion, but is that something we could say in code, that an accessory use is protected?
If that's the direction that the assembly would like to go, you know, we could certainly draft language about that.
Okay. Any thoughts from the committee on that?
John, this is Crystal.
Yeah, Crystal, go ahead.
But it seems to me we're still talking the same definitions of protected, though, aren't we? Even if something could have an accessory use or a secondary use, but it would still follow under the criteria of what is considered protected use for a primary use, correct? I mean, we'd have to have some definitions, obviously, but anyway, I guess I'm just kind of trying to think through what that actually looks like in terms of language. So anyway, maybe Ryan wants to expand on it a little bit, but anyway, thanks. Just thinking here.
Yes, through the chair, I can definitely expand on that because I probably wasn't very clear in my last response. But so in code, we have defined principal uses and we have defined accessory uses. If we were to recognize accessory uses as protected land uses, we would also have to add those accessory uses in the list of protected land uses, because what's in the list of protected land uses now are defined principal uses. We don't have any accessory uses defined. So in the case where you have multiple uses on site, they have to be multiple principal uses, if that makes sense. There's a lot of the same term being used over and over again in that string of thought there.
Okay, this would belong when we get back to the discussion of protected uses then, which we'll start evaluating. And at that point, maybe once we looked at it, the list we end up with, and say, okay, do we protect this even if it's an accessory use? But accessory uses are different though. It's a different list than primary uses. Is that correct?
Right. Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Well, for the committee, let's postpone this to when we get back, when we do various protected use discussion. We have about 7 minutes. Let's get through a few more of these, and then I think at the next meeting we could finish this off and then get to the document that compares our protected uses with the states and see where we land on that. So protected use will wait. 23 is add a section allowing a party to request a formal use determination. And this was something that Meg had spearheaded. I think we have wording on this and have a consensus that this will be done. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is Dean. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if Meg was speaking up there.
I don't see Meg
but
in
I
the
did work
queue.
with her and came up with language. It's not yet in the draft. I guess I would comment on this time that the draft AO distributed today. I mean, a lot of reconciliation with the drafts that we, I guess, last time I mentioned we had a couple of different drafts and we're reconciled the differences and so forth with Mandy. So, and I've also cut out a lot of sections where there were no changes. So the document you have is about half the size, you know, from almost 90 pages to just over 40. We're saving some paper for people that print, but also simplifying, formatting, and a few updates. But I have on my list things like this and the breastfeeding and some others that aren't in it, but they're in the to-do list in the queue. So I'm still in the middle of updating. So for next time, you should see those in place in the draft AO.
Okay, so 23 is being worked on. 24 to allow breastfeeding. We had discussed that, and so that's going to be in this draft a draft. Okay, so let's move on. 25 was regarding reconsidering on-site consumption. Our consensus was no, let it go for a few years and see where we land. 26. Okay, and this was fairly large, and this is criteria we based our decision to pull a license. And do we have more detail on this than the question? Crystal, have you worked up any kind of triggers on this? Crystal?
Okay, so yeah, sorry, I was pushing all the wrong buttons at all the wrong time. So we do have some things that I sent in, and I think Dean's going to speak to that too. But there's a list of about I don't know, 6 or 7 different triggers. So Dean might want to talk about where that's at in the new AO. I think he did put it in there somewhere. But let Dean speak to that. Thanks.
Okay, Dean.
Yeah, that's in the draft, and from what Crystal had sent me, it just needs a little refinement. But it's there on page 5 down at the bottom, subsection B, which needs to be relettered with 5 factors. Anyways, this is going to require a number of other changes throughout the license administration article. Because so many sections say the assembly approves, and this will change things to where some assembly approval isn't needed for renewals, you know, if only if they're pulled based on these factors for efficiency. So anyways, I've got Crystal's factors and all. Needs a little more work.
Okay, so we're almost through this. So I'd actually like to stop now and give at least a few moments for public participation. And I know we all have 11:30 meetings. Does that work for everyone? Ryan, you're in the queue. Quick, or you want to wait?
Just real quick, Mr. Chair, but just on the topic number 23, the use determinations, I just want to make sure that we're not creating a new process in code, because we already have a process for use determinations. So any reference to a use determination within the marijuana section should point to the use determination section that's already within code. So that's all.
Okay. Comment for Dean then. So, okay, good. Thank you. Okay, any public comments? Do we have someone out there, Mandy?
Hello.
Sounds like Mr. Haberman.
Yep.
Go ahead and talk to us. Thanks.
Okay. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I'd like to go back regarding your committee. Pre-COVID scenario where you operate now telephonically. Remember those meetings in Elmore? Quite a few people were attending from the public, people that are concerned either way with legislation. It was pretty much packed in there, of a lot members of the public, crowded too, and a lot of chance for public input. Mind you, their introductions at the beginning of the meeting, know the names of the people, so it was on the record who was in the room, including public, which is not occurring for this meeting. But you have the thing on the agenda for introductions, but it's not noted. But also there was every time you went into, before making a decision, you encourage public comment throughout the meeting. Anyone would have any comments in the public, and that's not what's happening here. What's happening here, and what I'm seeing regarding this meeting, is simply representative of the marijuana industry speaking regularly throughout the meeting. I don't question her rights, but where's the balance and where's the fairness and where's the connection with the so many people that were so involved in discussion on marijuana issues? And so this is greatly changed. Also, for note, the items that were put on the agenda on the website didn't appear to approximately 10:05, the documents that you're looking at. It wasn't there before. The agenda was, but not the items that you were addressing. So that's also a complication. Also, it's very difficult for the public to follow with what you're doing, because you have a conversation among yourselves with a visual, looking at documents, visual, and we're having that team thing that you had I believe the previous meeting had a way for us to connect with, and not just audio. So you're back to what it was before, and this is getting more and more complicated. And I'll close with this. I appreciate anyone answering this question. There's a meeting tomorrow, video recording in front of the fountain for you all, special meeting. What's all that about? Because it's unclear to me as a member of the public. And thank you, and I wish you all the best.
Okay, Mr. Haberman, that is a brief video for those of us who are taking part in the Special Olympics fundraiser, which typically you jump into cold water at Goose Lake, but we're spared that this year, and instead we make a funny video or a video of some type. And that will be part of that video. So anything else? Should we adjourn? And I appreciate your comments, Eugene. They're good points. All right, we're adjourned.
Move to adjourn. Thanks, John.
Thanks, everyone.